Hello, word. Welcome to the show. Welcome to the Red Fleet. It's me again, your slightly brighter blue Kerner, host of this show. Today we've got back on the show Sally Mju, Axel, Schulz, and John Christopher Kern. Say hi to the people. Sally, who are you? What are you doing? You want to introduce yourself?
Hello. Hi, everyone. I have to introduce myself again in every episode. You guys should remember me already.
Yeah, we
My
need to
my name
work
is
on that.
Sally. My name is Sally Mju. I'm the leader of Vietnam Young Marxists, and I work as a researcher, translator, and educator, whatever you want me to be. So today I'm joined with Coin, Axel, and Chris to talk about Erich Fromm, and more importantly, why we still need to read Fromm today. Fromm doesn't talk about freedom only as a political ideas. He talk about something many of us feel in everyday life. In this podcast, we don't read Fromm in a dry academic way, but we read him through today experiences, through work, social life, politics, and daily stressor. So, yes, that's my introduction. Sorry, too long. Asa?
Okay, yes, I'm Axel Schulz. I should say I've been on once before on this particular show. I've also had two podcasts on Erich Fromm on my own. So I teach European history, modern European history at the State University of New York in Potsdam, not Potsdam, Germany, but Potsdam in upstate New York, which is right now an incredibly cold place. It's freezing in my office, probably very different for Sally, who is in Vietnam, and it's much warmer there, right? So I've been interested in Erich Fromm for quite a few years. Even though I live in the United States, a few years ago, someone gifted me the collected works of Erich Fromm in German. So I have Erich Fromm's books, some of them in English, but the collected works in German as well. Uh, I find him very interesting and very relevant to our situation today because of his focus on freedom at the time when freedom is under such massive assault. And hopefully we will have an opportunity to talk about the difference between our age and the age under which Erich Fromm operated, because he lived mainly under the conditions of Keynesian capitalism. And we are unfortunate to live under the conditions of neoliberal capitalism, and we are experiencing the resurgence of fascism as well. But Fromm also experienced fascism, so Fromm's insights into fascism are very relevant to our situation today. So very much looking forward to what my fellow podcasters have to say about Fromm and Marx and Hegel.
Yes. Hello, folks. I've been on with I've made I don't know how many podcasts with the Colonel. My name is John Christopher Kern. However, I go by Chris. The My job here is to ground Fromm and his particular historical situation in Marxist Hegelianism. Hegel wrote before, both Hegel and Marx wrote before Fromm, and however, their vision, particularly Hegel's vision, is very much like Fromm's, but in perched or posed or written in very abstract technical Hegelian language. And this is a problem for reading Hegel, I know, and even more a problem for understanding Hegel. But Hegel is very much concerned to describe politics, the state, community, society in terms of experience. And indeed, in terms of something called spirit. Hegel's conception of freedom is very complicated. My job is to bring this to Fromm and to see how Fromm elucidates Hegel and how we might Hegel's conception of freedom is very psychological, and does concern very much so, oddly enough, people don't know, with everyday life. By the way, we just may have lost Sally because I see only 3 participants. So there's that. Since she is going to start off. Oh, here she comes back. I see 4. There we go.
Oops, sorry.
Oh, those things happen.
Yeah.
So experiences, everyday life, emotions, spirit. Hegel is very much concerned, despite his technical language, to speak of the same things that Fromm is concerned about. So I hand it now back to I believe Sally.
Why not?
Mm-hmm.
I could say something.
Oh
I
yeah,
think I should be
journal.
prepared for this.
Yeah.
I'm really a bad host, actually, but I'm trying. So thank you all for that. Let me steal some more time because I have no idea what I'm doing here. I think we prepared some questions. So I would just go with the description on the video and work with those questions, and you will just answer whatever you want to feel like answering. That worked well with. So,
Okay.
how does Fromm's humanist and psychological understanding of freedom complement or conflict with structural and historical accounts of emancipation in Marx and Hegel? That would be a question. It doesn't really have to be Marx and Hegel for you, Sally. We should be better prepared for this. This is all on me. I think we can just freestyle through all of this. Turns out it's a lot of material. So Sally, you wanna send me some questions I should read for you? How do we go by this?
Oh, what? Yeah, okay, yeah, I don't. So sorry, I'm lost.
That's no problem. How do we want to go? How do we
We
want to?
repair some questions, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I just read one just randomly. I don't know. It's the right one. Do you have another one for me? Do you want to read the question 2, maybe? Do you have the
Okay.
question? Because I don't.
Okay, yes. Okay. Yes, as usual. Don't worry. So, we will run by this way. I will read the questions and then I will talk about it, and then Axel turn, and then Chris, and then Coin can have some of the ideas and
Nice.
summarize everything together. Would that be all right?
Excellent.
Sounds great. Yes.
All right. Then take it
Go.
away, Sally.
Oh no, it's bad internet again.
Sally, there you are.
I think Sally might be frozen. I'm
She's
not
freezing.
sure.
Yeah.
Oh, she's back.
I saw her moving a second ago, but she's frozen again.
We're off for a good start.
Yeah.
Always
I think the
technical
first
difficulties.
question had to do with socialism, which Fromm understood mainly as centered around human freedom. And the question then was, what does that mean for us in the 20th century, the 21st century,
Right.
I should say, in regard to the socioeconomic conditions in the 21st century? How relevant is Erich Fromm's definition of socialism as something that should expand the realm of human freedom?
That's totally true. I knitted that into the first part for some reason. Who understood Erich Fromm, who understood socialism primarily as a project of human liberation. In the 21st century, we would have to ask what human freedom means under contemporary social and economic conditions. That was actually the first question, and I messed up again. So that's good. We got that out of the way already. Sally, are you back with us?
Yeah, I'm back with you all. Should I start again?
No, you go right at the first question.
Okay.
Okay. You go. I mean,
What is the question?
the question again. The question was in the
Okay,
21st century.
that's confused me.
Okay.
Okay,
You-
so the first question here is when Fromm asked why people escape from freedom. What does this question say about everyday life in the 21st century? Are we going with this?
Yes,
Yeah.
please.
Okay, yes. So this is fine. It will be fine. It will be fine. Okay, yes. So, from questions like it's not only still relevant in the 21st century, but has become even more urgent because now we live in a time when freedom, at least on the surface, seem to be expanded to the maximum. People can choose their jobs, lifestyles, and political views, ways of expressing their identity, and even how they present themselves to others through social media. However, the paradox is that this wide range of choices comes together with the constant anxiety, mental instability, and the deep sense of exhaustion. And Erich Fromm help us understand that freedom is not only about having more choices, but also about psychological burdens. This is the whole ideas of the Frankfurt School. So when traditional social framework are no longer strong enough to guide life, individuals are forced to decide who they are and how they should live and to take full responsibility for the consequences of their decisions. And in today's society, freedom is often understood through an extreme form of individualism, like failure is seen as a personal fault, poverty is explained as a lack of effort, and mental health problems such as depression or burnout are reduced to the idea of not being positive enough. And this way of thinking turns freedom from a chance for human development into pressure to constantly rule one's value. And under this pressure, many people try to escape from freedom through very modern mechanism. So that's the term, also the title for his book, Escape from Freedom. And dependence on social media, on algorithm, and on experts who teach success, happiness, or self-improvement are clear example. And in these cases, personal decisions are partly handed over to external systems like algorithm decide what we should watch or like. Therapeutic language tell us how we should feel, and rigid group identities give us a sense of belonging in exchange for giving up at independent thinking. And Fromm shows that escaping from freedom is not a sign of personal weakness or immaturity, but a psychological reaction to a society organized around competition, isolation, and the measurement of human value through performance. So when social relationships are increasingly treated as tools and individuals are expected to manage everything on their own under unequal conditions, it's become understandable that people look for safety in obedience, conformity, or dependence. So therefore, in these questions, I would address that Fromm does not simply criticize individuals, but he forces us to face the social structure of the 21st century itself, like a society that speaks in the name of freedom, but constantly creates conditions that make people afraid of the very freedom itself. Yes, that's my answer. Thank you, Axel.
Yes, and as I did last time with our Rosa Luxemburg podcast, I can only agree with everything you have said here. And I would add that, what stood out to me when I thought about this question was that Erich Fromm considered these issues under very different circumstances, the circumstances of Keynesian capitalism. There's a quote in his famous book on Marx's concept of man, where he talks about socialism. It's located on page 58 of that book. And the quote reads, "Socialism is not a society of regimented, atomized individuals, regardless of whether there's equality of income or not, and regardless of whether they are well fed and well clad. It is not a society in which the individual is subordinated to the state, to the machine, to the bureaucracy. In fact, as Marx says quite clearly in his economic and philosophical manuscripts, communism as such is not the aim of human development. What then is the aim? Quite clearly, the aim of socialism is man." So this underscores that to Erich Fromm, socialism is about expanding the realm of freedom. It's about humans, and of course he uses, given the time period this was written in the 1960s, he uses the common, somewhat sexist language of that time period. Humans need to overcome their alienation of their labor, their alienation of the work they're doing, their alienation from one another, their alienation from themselves, their alienation from nature, and so on and so forth. So his concept of freedom and his concept of socialism are intrinsically connected. Again, because all of this was written during the day and age of Keynesian capitalism, where in at least the capitalist core, Canada, the United States, parts of Western Europe, West Germany certainly, the Scandinavian countries, France, to a lesser extent, Great Britain and Italy, some basic material needs, such as, housing, food security, etc. These things were met. So Fromm could essentially write, and the same applies to the state socialist societies, that these things, while important, they're just, the basics, and a really emancipated society should move beyond these things, providing enough clothing, feeding people, and so on and so forth. But we live in a day and age when these things are not commonplace anymore. Here in the West, the United States, but also Europe and Canada, even though it's not as extreme as it is in the US, we're returning to the conditions of the 19th century with neoliberal capitalism, where the material foundations of people's well-being is being taken away as well. People are pushed into precarious work. People have very little job security. So when we think about Erich Fromm's relevance, it's not just, the more developed aspects of freedom. It's the fact that, freedom is under assault, even in terms of the basic material necessities. So, and as Sally pointed out, with, the rise of social media and AI, we're in a day and age when under the mask of choice, people are being so deliberately manipulated. And again, while Erich Fromm had grave concerns about the future, he died in 1980. I think if he had lived to our day and age, and if he would have witnessed the climate emergency we're experiencing, if he would have seen Donald Trump so unabashedly talking about imperialist conquests, about the redivision of the world into spheres of influence, where even any pretense of human rights as a cover for naked imperialist aggression is gone. All of that makes Fromm's age quite different from our own age, where I think freedom is even more threatened than it was in the 1960s and 70s. So whatever Fromm warned about then is even more acutely under attack today.
Okay, thank you for that, for both of you. Um, so Hegel's idea of freedom is, or uses of the word freedom, can be both very complicated and very abstract. However, at the same time, everything that Alex and Sally are talking about fit very well into Hegel's anticipations of what Fromm is explaining, is describing. I will be referring mostly to Hegel's last book, The Philosophy of Right, in which Hegel talks about the modern nation state, which actually I would say the modern and constitutional liberal state. In other words, Hegel is, to the extent that although he doesn't use the word liberal, what he describes or explains as part of the state is, or a crucial aspect of the state, fits what we call liberalism. And surprisingly, the issue of alienation and indeed Keynesian economics, Hegel anticipates these, oddly enough. So Hegel talks about the development of the self in terms of various stages, as well as the concurrent development of history. And he looks at history as a development of different, or a series of changing different personalities, in which freedom plays its particular role in each of these. So freedom in Roman times meant something entirely different from freedom in medieval times, meant something entirely different from freedom in modern times. This is one of the complications of working with Hegel. His abstract, so he has a number of definitions of freedom. I won't bore you all with these, but his most modern development is in the introduction to the philosophy of right, when he explicitly, more or less, describes freedom as a alternative to alienation. In other words, freedom involves identification and recognition of the other, Now, what this other is different from the various aspects of the state that Hegel describes. So in dealing in law, the other is other litigants. But it also can be the judicial system. The other is the state itself. But Hegel puts forth something new in political theory, new compared to classic liberalism. Hegel puts forth a new sphere of politics in between the individual and the state, which he calls civil society. And indeed, Hegel is said to invent civil society as a locus, but more than that, an institution within which we operate in terms of what Hegel calls subjective freedom. This is the freedom of individual self-determination. what we might call individual freedom, but Hegel is very clear that this should be integrated into society and indeed community. Hegel believed that this is done through work, and Hegel believed that it is our work that determines our honor. We take honor in our work, but that's not enough. That's not enough for Hegel, because Hegel recognizes that this subjective freedom needs to be grounded, needs to be grounded. Hegel is straightforwardly European, Western European perhaps, in which he relates or he discusses the conception of freedom, individual freedom, subjective freedom in civil society in terms of good old-fashioned Lutheran Protestantism. In other words, the individual is free in his or her individual relationship to God. In other words, it's not Catholicism. The institutions that Hegel describes in civil society ground us. Institutions of the family, institutions of work, institutions of corporations, which are more like guilds. These are there to guide us and sustain us in what Hegel describes essentially as the market. The market, which he explains pretty much in the same terms as Adam Smith in The Wealth of Nations.
Yeah.
So in other words, our conception of freedom today ground in the market, a matter of individual determination, all of us making our own selves as we establish our value in terms of how much we of our work. Hegel is very concerned with this, but he also sees in an amazing two paragraphs in civil society that there are problems. The first problem is that the market society, he doesn't use the word capitalist, of liberalism creates too much. We make too much. The division of labor, which is part of Adam Smith's Wealth of Nation, accentuates on production, and our system makes too many goods. In other words, overproduction. At the same time, it seeks to lower wages. So, as Hegel says, we have low wages of people who can't afford to buy the goods that are produced. This is sort of what we have today. We can make an amazing amount of things, but people can't afford them. The people who consume and pay for the goods are the workers who are continually losing money as wage earners. In other words, Hegel sees the beginning of a Keynesian crisis. He sees this, but he doesn't know what to do. So his solution, remember this is 1820, his solution is, surprise, surprise, colonialism and the export of excess people overseas. That's it. In other words, Hegel sees the problem, but doesn't know what to do about it. He also sees this mass of unemployed people growing and perhaps turning into a rabble. He leaves this problem in civil society, but he does have another odd solution that people forget. Hegel says that it's necessary for the state to provide a sense of love. The state must, I know, surprise, surprise, right? The state must be concerned,
No, I'm not
Hegel says.
surprised, just cheesy.
I know.
Sorry.
Hegel says that people need to be loved and that the state in somehow, perhaps through welfare, but it must administer this welfare in a spirit of love. Now, this is quite a surprise, but Hegel is both aware of the growing problem, to which Keynesianism is a solution, but also aware of the Frommian concern with love. And this is because Protestantism is essentially an individualistic religion. Now, identity, there is subjective freedom and there is objective freedom. Objective freedom we can understand as the conditions through which the state is organized to preserve civil society. So the state is there to regulate and preserve the market system in civil society. Hegel isn't really quite sure how this should happen, but you can think of these ideas of subjective freedom and objective freedom as two senses of spirit. In other words, there's the spirit of the individual freedom. Then there's the spirit of the state, the spirit of the culture, the spirit of the moment, the spirit of the times. Hegel describes this as an ongoing sort of reconciliation between the we and the I, the we and the I. What the state must do is coordinate, harmonize between the we and the I. This is not unlike his psychological understanding of freedom in the phenomenology, to the extent that we, each of us, at any one time, is a moment. There is what Sally is thinking right now, what Axel is thinking right now, and even what Kern is thinking right now. But what we are at any one moment is not who we are, as well. Axel, Sally, and Kern are more than what they're thinking right now. We are a combination of selves. And Hegel is concerned for what we would call the integrated self. The problem with alienation on an individual level is how to coordinate our particular moments, sadness, happiness, despair, joy, with our overall sense of character, to balance the we and the I. And this indeed is what Hegel is also concerned with at the macro level in the state, how to balance the we or coordinate the we and the I such that we are not alienated towards ourselves. And this gets us to the escape from freedom, and to the extent that we are alienated from the self that we are that is made for us, that we must inhabit in civil society. The responsibility of subjective freedom can be just too much. It needs to be succored with some sort of state institutional action, and the notion that the state loves us. The state cares about us. The state wants us to be all that we can be. But some of us may remember from that phrase, be all that you can be. This was a phrase used by the U.S. Army in order to enlist, in order to get young men to enlist in the Army. In other words, be all that you can be is a selling point of the Army, to say, look, you don't have to make it in the marketplace. You can be a member you can escape from freedom and join the U.S. Army. I'll leave it there. And I hope this elucidates both Hegel and Fromm. And let's go to the next question.
Okay. Kern, do you want to summarize something before we start the next question?
I couldn't possibly summarize the fucking thing. You guys are just amazing, man.
Okay.
Completely threw it out of the ballpark. I'm just
Okay.
sitting here and just having my... No, this is,
Yes, this
this
is
is-
very awesome. Okay,
Yeah.
because I try to connect from with our what's happened in our modern day times, and Axel is showing us that how from thinking in the 20th century is still relevant to today. And then Chris give us a perspective of how Hegel and Fromm can be connected to each other. That is wonderful. And now I think we go into the question number 2. And so Fromm understands freedom not only as a personal choice, but as the ability to become a fully developed human being in society. How this view differ from or add to Marx and Hegel? Well, yeah, this is going to be fun. So, Fromm's understanding of freedom does not oppose to Marx and Hegel, just like what Chris and Axel has shown us before. Instead, it can be seen as a deeper development that adds a human and psychological dimension to their ideas. So Fromm begins with the same basic questions like how can human beings become free in modern society? However, he pays special attention to how freedom is experiences, felt, and practices in everyday life. So for Hegel, in the philosophy of right, well, I'm not 100% Hegelian, so Chris can ask me on this later. Freedom is not seem like the freedom to choose as an individual. It is a process in which the individual reaches self-awareness and become reconciled with a rational social order. So freedom in Hegel views, and in Chris' view, he's talked about Hegel as different definitions, and he has different definitions and identification. So freedom is Hegel views means that people recognize themselves in social institutions such as family, civil society, and the state, and no longer see them as alien forces. However, Hegel places strong trust in the rational nature of these institutions and in the power of historical reason to realize freedom. And so Marx takes over and criticizes Hegel by bringing freedom back to the material basis of social life. In the economics manuscript, Marx thinks that people cannot be free when they are alienated in their labor, when the products of their work and social relation turn into forces that control them, and therefore freedom is linked to changing the relation of production and regaining collective control over the material conditions of life. However, Marx mainly focuses on economic and social structure and on objective forms of alienation. And Fromm asks why. Even when objective conditions improve, people can still fear freedom and actively give it up. Here, Fromm introduced a dimension that he sees as essential, the psychological structure and social character of human beings. So, according to Fromm, freedom is not only the absence of external oppression, but an inner ability to love, to create, and to think independently, and to connect with others without losing oneself. A society may declare people legally or economically free, but it is also reduce individuals who are fearful, dependent, insecure, and emotionally blocked. Then that freedom remains only formal. And at this point, from Ed to Marx and Hegel, by linking freedom to concrete subjective life, he shows that alienation does not exist only in labor or institutions, but also reaches deep in character structure, like people learn to obey, learn to adapt, and avoid the responsibility of freedom as a form of self-protection. Therefore, freedom cannot be simply established through revolution or institutional reform. It must be lived through the full development of human beings with human social relation. And in other words, Fromm does not reject Marx or Hegel. Instead, he helps us to reread them through one key questions like what kind of human beings are created by the social form we build? And are these people truly capable of living freely? Yes, that is my thinking. I wonder what does Axel think?
Yes, I again agree very much with this. And there is a segment in the Communist Manifesto where Marx attempts to define communism as a free association of producers. And he argues this free association of producers comes into existence because the freedom of the individual is the precondition for the freedom of the collective. And I found this to be very interesting, because it emphasizes the connection between individual freedom and collective freedom. And it also points out a certain sequence. There was an East German writer named Stefan Hermlin, who in one of his essays kind of wrote about how he always misread this passage, saying he intuitively thought it read, the freedom of the collective is the precondition for the freedom of the individual, as opposed to the other way around, meaning you need to have socioeconomic conditions such as the fulfillment of certain material needs, and only then can you at some point create the conditions where individual freedom is possible. But Marx and Engels argue that is actually not the case. Individual freedom is the precondition for collective freedom. So that illustrates, first of all, something about the relationship between bourgeois liberalism and socialism, meaning that Marxism is not hostile to bourgeois liberalism. It regards the accomplishments, the positive accomplishments of the demands of bourgeois liberalism, individual freedom such as freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, freedom of opinion, and so on and so forth, as very important. The question of whether liberals are consistent in actually defending liberalism is a very different subject matter. But Marx argues that these, Marx and Engels, that these liberal freedoms are indeed very significant, and the social liberties, such as meeting people's material needs and the right to education, the right to healthcare, and so on and so forth, they should not be seen as in opposition, or something that should be counterposed to these social and civic liberties. They have to be seen as interconnected and as contingent upon one another. So Fromm very much argues that indeed alienation is what needs to be overcome. And once, and this connects with what Chris was saying earlier about Hegel and the reconciliation of the individual and individual identity with reason and the larger social whole. The quote I was touching upon before, there's a segment before: the aim of socialism is man. It is to create form and an organization of production where man can overcome alienation from his products, from his work, from his fellow men, from himself, and from nature, in which he can return to himself and grasp the world with his own powers, thus become one with the world. So this notion of reconciliation, of overcoming the division between individuals and the world, the larger social body, and the alienation between the two, that is what is core to Marx's thinking, and it's core to the thinking of Erich Fromm as well.
Yes. So excellent. Thank you both, Sally and Axel. That gives me again, we can see Hegel's anticipations of all of these issues in his 1820 book, more than 100 years before Fromm. What Hegel sees is crucial to the reconciliation process between the individual and the whole, so to speak, is the institution of civil society, which he understands as, interesting enough, an education. What we learn in civil society as we proceed through our various stages in life, from the university, from getting a job, from pursuing our career, is that we realize as we get educated, the extent to which our individuality is necessarily grounded in the whole. um, to get an education is to understand how we individuals, how civil society, how our world in civil society requires a sense of the collective good. That's what it means to be educated, is to learn the connections between the individual and the whole. The problem is that Keynesianism, or indeed Hegel's suggestion of colonization, these instruments of government are very brute. They are very they are not sophisticated. They only marginally deal with the problems of the individuals in civil society, mostly by rearranging populations or rearranging flows of dollars. What Hegel is more concerned with the work process, and he's more concerned with, well, what we could call worker collectives. Now Hegel, it's not so much worker collectives, but institutions within civil society. Like, this could be anything from corporations, actual modern corporations, to things like the university. Sally and Axel, and to a lesser extent myself, we organize ourselves through the university, which in turn takes care of us. That's the theory. Of course. However, what we have seen is that the logic of subjective freedom, as determined through the marketplace and competition, has sort of gone haywire because, well, we have civil society has become constructed through something Hegel only had a glimmer of, and that's capitalism. He sees how capitalism leads to classic overproduction, but he doesn't see how the logic of capitalism individualizes, brutalizes, and becomes its own culture and its own spirit. Indeed, now, this also anticipates Max Weber, the spirit of capitalism, but also, again, Protestantism and the idea that we are each responsible for our own fates as individuals. So Hegel really didn't see this, but he did see this coming out of civil society as a threat to the state. In other words, what would happen if the mob, motivated by its despair in civil society, which was a problem, what if they attempted to take over the state? And this is how Fromm, or Hegel, is very worried about the threat of democracy. He's understood democracy as mob rule and was very much against it. At the same time, Hegel was not a Prussian to the extent that he was not a liberal. Hegel advocated something that was very unusual for his time. He advocated most of the rights that we understand as liberal rights: free press, jury trial, what we would call due process, all the liberal rights of civil society guaranteed by the state that are under threat now. In other words, so Hegel sees the problem. He also sees that civil society needs to be protected in some way through these rights granted by the state. Now, it's only Marx who talks about the capitalist laceration of institutions and civil society, and turning things like the university into essentially profit-making corporations. Hegel, however, also has a sort of a larger, sort of disturbing idea of what the problem is. And this connects with this solution to alienation, indeed, love. So Hegel is not so
Again.
much concerned or he talks down democracy as mob rule, but what he really sees as the problem is fanaticism. People falling too much in love with ideas. Hegel is afraid of, indeed, religious fanaticism, that people will, in other words, it's the attempt to reconcile part and whole, individual and the collective, would very much be understood as you and God. And the belief that you know God, you know Jesus in your heart. Hegel spends 20 pages warning against religious fanaticism brought into politics. He also, by the way, mentions that any sort of spirit can become fanatical, even science. He says that people can become fanatically scientific. Right? Weird, huh? But then again, this was what we were concerned with in the 1990s, with the concern for big science taking us over. Hegel he wants us to identify with institutions in civil society, but and indeed the state, but also is worried about too much identification with the whole, such that it becomes fanaticism. The one way, so the question is how to organize civil society in such a way that it doesn't lead to fanaticism. It doesn't lead to the sense that each of us knows God and can do whatever we want because we know God in our hearts. The one way that I find intriguing that is not particularly articulated is what is called anarcho-syndicalism. Now, this is a phrase used by Marxists. Axel knows about this. It's the idea that civil society is constructed by workers' collectives who then work together through a sense of publicity to determine how goods will be produced. Now, I'm not really clear. I don't have a clear sense of anarcho-syndicalism myself. Maybe that's one thing that we can look into later. But this seems to be Marx's sense or closest to Marx's sense of a developed civil society in which is organized by workers' collectives. One last thing, the whole idea of the Soviets in the Soviet Union, this too was part of local organizations coordinating that themselves together without the overall centralizing state. We have seen these things happen before, but they have been quickly crushed by the needs of the state organization itself. So I said a lot there. But this is how Hegel sort of anticipates the problem of Fromm, and Marx or Marxists sort of with this idea of anarcho-syndicalism, some sort of organization, publicity, network might work today.
That is fascinating. It's the first time I've ever heard these two things, Hegel and anarcho-syndicalism, in the same sentence. That's wonderful. It's a very interesting,
Yeah.
very fascinating way of thinking about these things. One thing that occurred to me was the question, is there one Hegel or are there several different Hegels? Because Hegel changes politically. I
Yes.
mean, he starts out as a supporter of the French Revolution, and he ends up as in my opinion, apologist of the Prussian absolutist authoritarian state, right?
Right.
So there
So
is an evolution or a devolution in his political development. How is that reflected in his philosophical categories?
So a brief answer would be that Hegel realizes that indeed he advocates a free press, he advocates jury trials, he advocates a sort of due process of law, he advocates a legislature, and indeed he advocates the nation state. This is not nationalism at this time is still sort of connected with the French Revolution. And itself was questionable. Hegel knew that the French Revolution contained institutions of the modern state that were necessary for development. But Hegel only briefly mentions them because Hegel is being censored. Hegel is being monitored. There are people in the Prussian state who are reading what Hegel is saying, and they are reading for any sort of hint that he may be advocating another French revolution. In other words, one reading of Hegel, which is mine, is that he is not an apologist for the Prussian state. He has to deal with Prussian censorship. So he advocates the various institutions that came with the French Revolution, but never mentions the French Revolution, or maybe once or twice. In other words, he's doing it backhandedly. He does, however, fear the mob. He fears democracy. He fears the terror. But he sees this as sort of not so much a matter of democracy itself, although he does lambast it, but fanaticism. That's what he is more afraid of. So this is my argument that Hegel there are others who think that Hegel is an apologist. I think he's avoiding censorship because the things he says in the philosophy of right are clearly institutions of the revolution. Indeed, a legislative assembly and where politics takes place. Finally, very briefly, it is that there's one Hegel, but you can take him in many directions. In part because Hegel has a freedom for this era and a freedom for that era, a freedom in the family, a freedom in civil society, a freedom in the state. There's subjective freedom, there's objective freedom. You can take all of these pretty much anywhere you want. There were elements of the Nazis who thought that Hegel was what was the guy. There were elements of the Nazis who thought Nietzsche was the guy. You can take it's not so much that there are many different Hegel ways to talk about freedom, but mostly people can take from Hegel what they want and take them in places where Hegel would never go himself. I hope that answers your questions. Yeah.
Okay.
This
Yes, I
was
want to.
this was let me quick just one thing that jumped in my mind. It's I'm this ed guy and I'm working with so I was thinking maybe we can really sum something up here this time, and it would be the fact that work doesn't set us free, but activity does. And love seems to play an important role in that. And that's something that, so we could end it here, not just today, I mean the whole thing, because now it's all out there. Now you know. It all explains everything. Why I'm doing Dadaism, why I'm trying to work within that field is something bigger. You know, that Starship Command. I take my leads from other people in the field, which I love, which work I love. Shout out to you know who. And yeah, so much for that. Thank you all, guys. I would just read the where are we third question. Did we just do two? I think we just do two.
Okay, and I want to summarize this part. Oh, we have a live question or something. Did you just said that?
No, I was just wondering that we just made two
Okay,
questions.
so yes. For this part, I relate Marx and Hegel to Fromm that he adds a psychological dimension to our human beings, and also brought Communist Manifesto by Marx and Engels to Fromm to talk about the alien nations and the important concept of reconciliation. While Chris talk about the worker collective and individual collective, just like what Axel addressed, very important about the freedom of the collective. Yeah, so both of you talk about Fromm's and talk about how Hegel and Fromm want to get the people out of the institution or something like that. However, Axel seemed to very agree with the reconciliation concept of Fromm, and that Fromm is also very agree with the concept of reconciliation by Hegel. But you know, I'm more an Adonist than a Frommian. I want more pains than happiness. So you know, I don't know, criticize. He criticized reconciliations, like he said we should not make peace too early with society. If suffering and injustice still exist, then saying everything is rational is a lie. And he said real conciliation can only come after real freedom, not before. So he's like he going against everything that we are all talking about today. So I don't want to destroy any of us right now. So let's jump to the question number 3. Okay. So
and I assume Fromm would argue, you know, that reconciliation is only possible once injustice has been removed, right? There cannot be any reconciliation if there are still egregious injustices, right? The condition for reconciliation is to create conditions that permit the flourishing of humanity, for people to develop their innate talents and their aspirations. And if that is hindered in any fashion, then reconciliation can either not take place at all, or it can only be a partial reconciliation. But full reconciliation, in a sense, would be the end of human history, right? A place of total harmony where nothing could take place, and that will not happen as long as humans exist, I presume.
Maybe it would be its start, you know, the start of real history, actual history for once. Maybe we could call it her story then this time. Why it's always his story? It should be her story.
Okay,
So,
yes.
To respond to what Sally and Axel have said, for Hegel, happiness is secondary to freedom. Freedom is but freedom for him is this reconciliation between objective freedom and subjective freedom, or between the I and the we. The thing that Hegel says, however, is that you can't have community. You can't have community without authority. That there needs to be some, if we're concerned for justice, we need to be able to say what justice is, what justice is, such that we can mediate between conflict. That's what justice is supposed to be. There are contradictions in society. Hegel is someone who believes that contradictions are inherent in the self. Indeed, it is contradictions that move us out of ourselves such that we become free. Growing up for Hegel is a process fraught with constitutions, moving from with contradictions, particularly moving from the family to civil society. That this is a serious problem, and then moving from thinking in the civil society back to the state. History to a certain degree is not only the history of spirit, but the history of each of us. As Hegel wants us to go back and constantly go over our lives, not unlike therapy, and to understand how it is that we developed our individual self in terms of the contradictions of where we came from. Um, it's not quite, in other words, as long as you have this move from family to civil society to state, there will be contradictions in the self that we must work through and thus must work through in society. These contradictions will constantly call forth the need for justice. Which come from, you could say, contradictions in the division of labor. Hegel sort of says the state will solve these problems. Bureaucrats will solve these problems. Social welfare will solve these problems. Interestingly enough, I would go to Marx's, oddly enough, vision of communism, which I am very suspicious of, but at the same time find an amazing, an astonishing place for where we might go in the future. But I'll leave that to later, if we get to it.
Okay.
Yeah, you already
Yes.
took it away. Our third question was it, I think.
Okay, let's
Which
get our third questions. So, Fromm warns that people may search for a sense of safety by submitting to authority. How does it help? How did this idea help us rethink the relationship between socialism and democracy and state power today? Wow, I'm going to answer this first, right? I need a masker. I want to. Can I cover my face like this when I'm talking? Okay.
No.
why?
Okay. Oh my God. Okay. Yes.
You're talking about socialism in general, not any specific places.
Yes. Yes. Okay. Try to be shocked. So, from Fromm warning is important because he shows that submission to authority does not come only from repressions or violence, but also from deep psychological needs. The need for safety, certainty, and relief from the burden of making decision, and taking responsibility in time of economic, political, or cultural instability. These needs become stronger, and he helped us see that people are not only pushed into power from above, but sometimes actively turn to authority as a refugee. So when life feels insecure and social structure seem too complex, letting other think, design, and take responsibility can appear attractive. In this way, power works not only through force, but also through psychological consent. This insight allows us to criticize pop capitalism and the socialist model of the 20th century. In capitalism, submission often appear as dependent on the market, expert, and managerial system. So people seem formally free, but are guided by forces they do not control. In many historical socialist systems, submission took the form of loyalty to the stay or the leader, a common good defined from above. And Fromm also encourages a critical views of modern democracy. Like democracy does not automatically mean freedom. A system focused only on election and managed consent can still reduce passive citizens who delegate responsibility to political elites. And from Erich Fromm perspective, socialism, democracy, state power should not be judged by their forms, but by the kind of people they create. A truly liberating society encourages participation, critical thinking, self-management, and shared responsibility. Freedom, therefore, is not achieved once and for all through the state or revolution, but through a long process of building social condition in which people no longer need to seek for safety in authority. Yes, I try to be as short as I can. Okay, yes, Axel.
Yes, I second that, of course. Fromm criticizes, just like Marx, this notion of abstract concepts. He does so implicitly. Abstract concepts like freedom and democracy. These things are often used as empty signifiers. Case in point, before we had the wonders of Trump, we had the wonders of Biden, and Biden talked a lot about the supposed core conflict in the world today as a conflict between, quote, democracy and authoritarianism. But of course, those who believe that is the core conflict, they never ever define what they mean with democracy. When they talk about democracy, which they claim to champion, they regard it as a thing. You know, democracy is either something you have or you don't have. And Marx and Fromm too, but Marx did so more systematically, looks at democracy historically. For example, when he uses terms such as bourgeois democracy, he does not use that dismissively, saying, you know, it is fake democracy, but it is a particular type of democracy where certain people have democratic rights, but other people are excluded from those democratic rights. So what matters a great deal is the content of these abstract concepts. And the same applies, of course, to you know, the societies that operated under the phrase real existing socialism. So to Fromm, yes, indeed, ultimately, what mattered was not as much formal structures, but the content of these formal structures. What did they enable? What did they produce in terms of the human beings that were encouraged to develop under those conditions? What conditions were produced by those kinds of structures? So but when we look at Erich Fromm's works, there is a championing of what one could call democracy from below. It's not always fleshed out in great detail, which in some ways is good, because as Marx pointed out many times, he did not want to write recipe books, cooking recipe books for the future, as in creating abstract blueprints. His approach was instead, and very wisely, I think, to look at the actual experience of working class people, such as during the Paris Commune, and what sorts of models of democracy they created. Because I think it is important for us to realize that we don't know yet fully what democracy could mean and should mean in terms of the actual content and in terms of the institutions. Whatever institutions we have developed, they're clearly inadequate, because what we have is perhaps a little foretaste of what democracy could be. But just as there is no socialism anywhere on earth. There also is no real democracy anywhere on earth. Both are categories that should be historicized and seen as processes. So you could say societies try to be, they aim to be in the process of creating something called socialism. They aim to be in the process of creating something called democracy, but they are, at the very beginning of this much longer road. And there's such a big gap between claim and pretensions and the actual reality. So later on, we will talk about some of the shortcomings of Erich Fromm, but I think one shortcoming is that some of his writings on democracy remain fairly abstract. They're normative. He's very much in favor of democracy. He is in the abstract in favor of expanding the realm of democracy. But it would have been interesting if he had looked at more real life examples of where people from different parts of the world, different working class communities, different indigenous communities, and so on and so forth, had experimented with forms of democracy. Of course, overall, I think his approach was democracy is something that has yet to be fleshed out and built in much greater detail.
Thank you very much. I think I can speak to these things. Hegel thought, or Hegel criticized abstraction. Indeed, he was a perhaps unfair but critic of Kant, to the extent that Kant's ideas of the categorical imperative were simply too abstract, and that they were divorced from everyday life. The idea, even, and this is indeed a religious fanaticism, by which you could substitute political fanaticism, which he also, of course, warns against, comes from abstraction. In other words, we don't ground this in everyday life. Instead, we have concepts of democracy which are connected to institutions that are far away from our day-to-day activity. And this is where I think Kern is right. We have sort of taken the idea, we have identified the idea of work with wages. We've identified the idea of work with indeed a militaristic sense of capitalism and the firm. We take orders from our boss. Workplaces are organized essentially as military organizations with a strict hierarchy. But this is not. This is. In other words, the idea of work is extracted from our day-to-day activities. As a whole person, and this is where I think Kern is right to look at activity. This is where we learn. We don't learn through going to work and working 8 hours a day and going home. We learn as we work in our societies and in our communities. This is where we can go to, I'm going to make a quick move to say, well, what sort of communities, what sort of societies? This is what capitalism has failed to construct, to the extent that, well, I want to bring in two words that I've mentioned before, and very briefly. One is love, the other is reproduction. Two words, love and reproduction, which take us to entirely different places. The problem with the capitalist system is it cannot reproduce itself. It cannot, it's having trouble creating enough jobs to give people work, to make a new working class, in part because a new working class is not needed. At least not in the sense that capitalism organizes work today. I know dozens of young people who get out of the university and they've learned all this stuff about in the environment, they've learned all this stuff about nursing, they've learned all this stuff about psychology, they've learned all this stuff how institutions work, but there are no jobs. There are no jobs. The capitalist system is failing to the extent that it is unable to provide the new generation with employment that both keeps people alive and that nurtures people. I would suggest that we understand this in terms of production, and indeed in terms of the nurturing in terms of the sense of love. What Keynesianism and institutional elections have done is that they have focused on production, as capitalism does as well. This has meant that Keynesianism has done everything for the white working class, for the white male working class. In other words, economic success has been judged in terms of the income of white men, and fairly bluntly as well. It's just that white men are not involved in reproduction. In other words, making sure that the system can sustain itself in the future. This is where capitalism is failing. What's interesting is that white men, is that in the world, particularly in America, we have deindustrialized. We have deindustrialized. This means that since there's a focus on wage earners, there's a focus on, and wages, there's a focus on cutting wages because wages get into profit. Furthermore, industrialization only promotes unions. So what has been slowly happening through a variety of mechanisms, some self-conscious, some not, is the decay or the lack of jobs for white men. Instead, we have a growth in what's called the service economy. What this means is anything from being a barista to being a psychotherapist. In other words, and these are realms which are taken up by women. It seems to be that corporations, indeed institutions, are and the community that is necessary to sustain them is more fit, some people are saying, for feminine consciousness more than male consciousness. The universities today have 60% women and 40% men. In other words, men are not getting an education. It is women who are operating, who are taking advantage of this new care economy. People are going into things like geriatric care, things like child care, assisting all the things that are necessary for reproduction. And they're coming back and they're saying they like their work. They like to take care of old people as long as their institutions are fully funded. Young men are not trained this way. Young men are trained mostly in terms of modern culture to be individuals. The thing is that the sorts of jobs that were available for young men are no longer there. So if there's one group that is alienated more than anyone else, oddly enough, the irony is that while Keynesianism and elections first work for white men, is that these very white men are the ones who are most alienated. So they're the ones who seek most for authority, and they, along with some desperate form of monetary wealth, because their wages are gone, so they join ICE. This is
Yeah.
the problem of of today. I always I ask my students, what do you think is the most dangerous group in America? And they say the Ku Klux Klan, or they say capitalists, or they say the state. But I say, no, 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 no. The problem today is young men between the ages of 15 and 25. They're the most dangerous group of all. That's who when you see a group of young men walking down you in the dark, who do you cross the street for? You don't do it for capitalists. You do it because these young men are not being integrated into the side. They're the most alienated. And the problem today is that these guys are given guns and they are told to, well, get rid of their problem. What's their problem? Women and people of color. They're the ones who are benefiting in their minds. And in other words, to me, this is, in other words, people are fleeing from freedom and individual choice because it's not providing wages and it's not providing a white male upper middle class life where the husband is in control. Instead, it is starting to value women, and it's starting to realize that immigrants are at the bottom of the scale and deserve our concern more than white men.
Yeah, I think that is very good and insightful. I would add, though, that the system doesn't really value women either. I know I know so many young women, and not just young women, but people, women of all ages, and some men too, who work in the so-called hospitality industry, in the fast food industry, in the healthcare industry, and they are being super exploited. They don't really get real contracts. They become, first of all, they're all at-will employees. They can be fired at any moment. They have no job security. They have very few benefits. They have no real paid vacation. Many have no access to healthcare. I know people who work almost full time and they don't get any healthcare, and it is incomprehensible and amoral to me how such a system is sustainable. They get poverty wages. Despite working, some of them work 2 or 3 jobs and they can still barely survive. They can barely pay rent. The difference, of course, is in the past, these men, often white working class men, were able to afford, an apartment or a house, and that these days are gone, right? Because of the end of Keynesian economics and the rise of neoliberalism, and the fact that now many people are being turned into temp workers. I don't know the exact numbers, but I think 60 or 70% of Americans are 2 or 3 paychecks away from homelessness. This is a country where the majority lives in deep insecurity. Anything can go wrong, an accident, any kind of health crisis, and they will lose everything and they will be out on the streets. And that kind of insecurity must cause immense anxieties as well, especially for people who previously were accustomed to, some degree of entitlement. And then there's the issue of right-wing billionaires radicalizing these people online with massive amounts of propaganda. I'm sometimes on TikTok and you have no idea how much right-wing propaganda there is on social media, trying to appeal to many of those lost young men, feeding them the most obnoxious, misogynistic, fascist trash imaginable. So it is, of course, their own insecurities, but it is being weaponized against them as well.
So I would like to, I made a serious mistake.
You didn't make any mistakes. I was just adding something here.
Here's my mistake. I said system, and what I meant, well, first off, is that the capitalist system in America and I think throughout the world has a limited way of supporting the new crucial spheres of reproduction. Health, education, healthcare. Capitalism has utterly failed and has led to current lives of misery. Which Axel, I think you do a correct, excellent job of describing. I was being optimistic and thinking of systemic in terms of a whole, which included what I would call counter hegemony. There is a within our contemporary system, there is a counter hegemonic trend which celebrates women, which is concerned. In fact, the position from which you and I are talking from, this is concern, is a sense that reproduction is everything, women's rights, the need to take care of our young and our old. This is a new way of thinking, and this is where the battle is right now. Young men see this and say, "Hey, what about me?" To a certain degree, their feelings are right. To a certain degree, as wage earners, they're being exploited, but right-wing billionaires are catering to their sense of alienation. For better or for worse, is part of a intellectual counterculture. In other words, we, only academics like us read Fromm, he wouldn't, as I would say, this is the problem. So that's sort of the problem is that the new is having trouble being born. This new concern for reproduction is not being met, but indeed is being exploited. And I'll leave it there.
Yeah, that was excellent. Thank you. I got to add something here right away. I'm not an intellectual. I got from a fellow printer, even way back when I really wasn't an intellectual. I was just printing along, studying my design stuff, and there was this fellow printer who once took me we shared his car a few times a week and talked, and then he went into Fromm, and I was like, who's that? What's going on there? So in a way, you're right. It's not really part of an education. It's more of a secret knowledge. So, yeah, good thing that we have this going to make Fromm somewhat palpable for the people. Maybe one thing I should add for people who ain't intellectuals, the categorical imperative from Kant is to act according to the maxim where you can at the same time universalize this thing and derive a universal law from your actions. And there's something deeply foul there when you maximize profits and everyone runs around maximizing profits, then you end up where we are now.
Yeah.
So there's some problems with that, which then in turn also would lead us to the next question, which was from, let me read this. So I actually have a job here. From
I want to raise some comments here first, and then we get to them. Okay. So I Everything is great. I mean, I talk about freedom does not mean democracy, but it's through a long process of building social condition, and also connects to Marx and from that, Marx never write about a cooking recipe for a restaurant, and from lack of democracy, lack of definitions about democracy, and that he should looking into more democracy community. And Chris also mentions that Hegel criticized abstraction, and he draw democracy to our everyday life, and exactly like what Korn just said from the before. So shortly we talk about we're criticizing the term that production and reproductions that the capitalists use for human, as they are machines that only work for productive things. Um one critics that I would like to make is I don't like Chris example of the people and races and gender, because right now we are living in globalism, right? So you cannot separate politics into identity groups, so solidarities like it's become weaker. Different form of oppressions are discussed, but share material interests are ignored. I mean, you talk about America, but that also happened in Asia. So you cannot just separate it races and gender to talk about politics just like that. And also, a serious critic must therefore connect identity with class and power, and you lack of that. Without these connections, like political criticism risk becoming fragmented and unable to challenge capitalism at its roots. So maybe just the generations things, I don't know. And finally, for the questions, I mean, the next questions that Cole's about to ask is, I think everyone is already talked about that. The things on conforming individual and the 20th century, everyone talked about that already. So I think we should jump to the last questions because we don't have much time now. Coin?
Okay. All right, boss. We move on to the next question. When reading from today, what in his thought still help us think about freedom and society, and what needs to be criticized, expanded, or rethought through Marx and Hegel? Sally.
Okay. Yes. So this is the final questions for our podcast today. And so the most lasting value in from thoughts like in his strong insistence that freedom cannot be understood in a purely formal or legal way. And for Fromm, freedom is always connected to emotional life, social relations, and the questions of what it means to live as a human beings. He reminds us that a society may remove external forms of oppressions, but if the people inside a society remain fearful, isolated, dependent, and unable to love or create, then liberation is still incomplete. And in today's context, where discussions of freedom are often reduced to individual choice or market flexibility, Fromm help us widen the meaning of freedom in a more human direction. He raises questions about the quality of life, whether people are truly able to connect with others without losing themselves, to think independently without becoming isolated, and to live meaningfully. Live in a society full of pressure. At this point, Fromm remains a particularly important voice, and at the same time, Marx become essential in dialogue with Fromm. Marx forces us to return to material foundations of freedom, like labor, relations of production and capital accumulation, and the control over the conditions of life. Marx remind us that the anxiety, fear, and dependence described by Fromm are not only psychological problems, but products of countries' social relations. And without the real change at the economic and social level, calls for inner freedom can easily be neutralized or turned into individualized responsibility. And Hegel, in a different way, helped expand from by placing freedom within a long historical and social process. And for Hegel, freedom is not a symbol and moral state of individual, as we have talked about before, and Chris helped us to understand what Hegel means by freedom. Um, And by the meanings that Chris have us, avoiding idealizing an abstract image of a complete human being, and instead understand freedom as a moving contradictions, always unfinished and always something that must be struggled for in history. Just like Axel say, never write a receipt for a restaurant. And by placing Fromm in dialogue with Marx and Hegel, we can think about freedom in a more complete way. Like freedom is both a social project requiring changes in economic, political, and institutional structure, and a lived practice, like connected to how people love, think, and relate to one another in everyday life, just like Kohn said and Chris said about our activities. So, in this sense, freedom is not only the right to choose, but the real ability to live as a meaningful human being in a society that no longer forces us to escape from our own freedom. This is very excellent because after all, when I try to summarize everything that we all having together, we all have the same thought about a thing, and that is very great. Even though I'm a little bit Adonis and that I like negative dialectics, I want more painful. We need more pains. Okay, yes, Asa.
So to me, what remains of from, and then I will say something about the limitations, but what remains, what makes him or what keeps him relevant is we live, as I've said before, in the day and age where Francis Fukuyama's statement about the end of history has been internalized by so many people, by most, with the exception of the revolutionary left, even those who make fun of it and say, of course, Francis Fukuyama was overly naive, and he translated the aspirations of US and Western imperialism into, incidentally, a Hegelian eschatology of history, framed in liberal terms. Mark Fisher makes a similar point in his book, Capitalist Realism. This neoliberal age of ours has collapsed a sense of the past and the sense of the future. People have difficulties imagining social relations different, fundamentally different from capitalism. When they think about socialism, they see socialism as a softer version of capitalism, capitalism with more benefits, capitalism essentially in neo-Keynesian terms. That is what Bernie's approach amounts to. That is what the best of the social democrats offer, and so on and so forth. And Fromm offers a very different take on socialism. He advocates for socialism that is fundamentally focused on centering human beings, not abstract ideologies, not states. And he thus articulates Marx's notion that ultimately socialism and communism are meaningful only if they lead to the further liberalization, the further emancipation of humans, expanding the realm of human freedom. Socialism and communism are not the objective of human history. They are a means to an end. The end in and of itself is the human, the emancipated, liberated human. And we all understand there will always be contradictions and eternal struggle and so on and so forth. Nothing will be completely reconciled, but it remains the objective. One question I would ask is, did Erich Fromm underestimate the importance of material needs? And I ask this question because it seemed perhaps during the heyday of Keynesianism that capitalism was able to incorporate at least significant segments of the working class and provide them with significant material benefits. One could plausibly believe that. I have talked to social democrats who have said, the working class is now integrated into the system. There are no major social contradictions any longer. And I think that is really not the case anymore. Keynesianism is dead. It will not come back. It cannot come back because the conditions of Keynesianism were so historically unique. It required World War II and the post-war boom. We cannot afford another world war without losing the entire planet. It also required, incidentally, the Soviet Union and the Soviet bloc. Whatever the shortcomings of the Soviet Union and the Soviet bloc have been, and there were myriad shortcomings, it did scare the shit out of capitalism, and it forced Western capitalism to become more civilized. It scared them into Keynesian capitalism. And of course, that very large and militant labor movement that we have seen in the late 19th century and the early 20th century, all of these conditions don't exist any longer that have, been vitally important for the creation of Keynesian capitalism. And now, in the day and age of neoliberalism, of course, Fromm is correct. Providing people with their material needs is not nearly enough. But having healthcare, having access to healthcare means a great deal to people who don't have that. People who do not have healthcare cannot imagine what it's like being sick and saying to yourself, I cannot afford to go to a hospital. I cannot afford my medication. I have to make a choice between paying tuition or taking medication, or I cannot afford to go to university any longer. I have had so many students over the years who have told me they would love to come back next semester, but they cannot afford it. They cannot pay tuition. So free university education, free public health care, adequate subsidized food. These things are definitely not characteristic of fully developed socialism, but they are at the same time very important. And once they're gone, you will really miss them. So, freedom is impossible without these things. Freedom requires a lot more. And you can be very unfree while having your basic material needs met, but without having those met, you cannot be free. Finally, did Erich Fromm neglect the working class? I don't think he did, but the primary target of his books were university students and knowledge workers and intellectuals. And I don't know how one can, appeal with books like Erich Fromm's books to even larger layers of the working class. But I think it is important that we always think about reaching more people, because knowledge workers are only a segment of the working class. And what about mass action, organizing, people in strikes, in protests? Erich Fromm supported those kinds of things in the abstract, of course, but he did not focus a great deal, in my opinion, on political mobilization from below, mass political mobilization from below. And I think that is something we need very much in our world today. So when it comes to potential shortcomings, I would see that as well, it might be exaggerated to say a blind spot, but it was not one of his major foci. But he did focus on things such as fundamental human needs that are not met by the existing system. The need, for example, for creativity. The capitalist workplace does not provide any kind of fulfillment for that human need for creativity. The capitalist workplace is an authoritarian place where workers have no say over what is being done and how it is being done, who is being hired, who is being fired, what sort of contract they get, and so on and so forth. And then the larger issue of meaning. Humans have a fundamental need for meaning. And even at the heyday of Keynesian capitalism, capitalism had a big crisis of meaning. Consumerism cannot fill that void. People are deeply unhappy even when their material needs are met and they have a lot of material things. Fromm's book, To Have or To Be, comes to mind. And capitalism is a system that cannot really provide much for people in terms of fulfilling their need for creativity and for meaning. And Fromm reminds us of that and gives us something else to aim for. It gives us a sense of what we could have and what we should have.
Yes, all of
Okay,
these.
Chris, can I say something first
course,
to
of course,
Axel? Thank
of course.
thank you. Okay, thank you so much, Axel. Well, there are two things that I want to accuse that you say from doesn't make it important on the material needs and that he neglecting on the working class. Well, you know, I wrote a paper on Fromm and social reproduction for the upcoming Frommian book. You know, he's talk about utopia social like he say, if we want to imagine a better future for our humanity, we cannot stop talking about utopia society. And when he talk about utopia society, he say that without the vision of a better society, without the image of utopia, we cannot find the energy to change the present. And that he talk about the visions of the society of cares, like we need the principle of unconditional nurture associated with maternal love, and it extended to the organization of the public life with the welfare, education, public health, and also many material needs are needed for that society to function. And then he also mentioned that for our children to develop, he observes something like that. He observes that the working class children are going faster toward the better future that we are imagining. So I believe that the ideas of him talking about the material needs and the working class are a lot. But in terms of you know, human development, like in children and also in the social reproduction theory, that's what I'm going. That's what I say. Thank you. Sorry,
Great.
Chris.
Yeah. Oh, no, no problem. Thank you very much for those comments. So when I think of Hegel and Marx, and I think of Fromm, the first thing that sort of comes to me is that Hegel and Marx both preceded Fromm. Hegel, indeed, but at the same time they anticipate him. Hegel talks about the things. Hegel in his complications, in the variety of things that he talks about, as well as the depth. He talks about alienation in civil society. And indeed in our largest meaning system at the time, which was Christianity. He saw how this could devolve into fanaticism. He saw the importance of the family. He saw and indeed the necessity of the state to provide both what could be called the beginning of Keynesianism, but also the need for the state to provide a sense of love, to give a sense that we are all in this together. So you can take these things and say, well, this is sort of what Fromm is talking about. And I think that's right. Um, um,
Mhm.
Marx at the same time, Marx also comes after Fromm, but he talks about the sort of the failure of Hegelian solutions, and indeed he anticipates, I think, the failure of Keynesianism, and the ultimate rise of a democratic, which he fears, mob, because he's looking at the French Revolution. That's what Hegel does. Marx tries to turn these things into a positive. He thinks that the working class and what Hegel calls the mob can be utilized to make a better world. Um, 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 I find myself, there's an interesting contrast that I see in my own thinking. On the one hand, I see what Fromm is talking about, and in terms of day-to-day life, in terms of love, in terms of folks, in terms of he providing a bridge to concern with social reproduction. And sometimes I talk to my students. A lot of times I to talk to my students about different forms of acting and thinking and feeling which are being born. And I identify this with counterculture and counter hegemony. However, Sally, in her discussion on Adorno, is right. When they want to know, well, how does the world work? How does the world work? Well, so yes, we can talk about counterculture and counter hegemony and concentration on the emotional content of day-to-day life, but really things are not going well. And I find myself going back to Keynes because that's how our leaders think, in terms of a framework that doesn't work anymore. So the odd thing is how to teach the way the New York Times talks about things in terms of Keynesianism, a model that no longer works. But they still have to know Keynesianism to know how our institutions are set up in terms of a way that doesn't work. And ultimately, oddly enough, well, not oddly enough, is that I look to Marx, but not as, but secondarily in terms of Marx's major concern. Marx is concerned with production. He gives in Capital, particularly in the second volume, he talks about finance. He begins to talk about finance capital. Well, I got to tell you, if you're going to teach what's happening today, you have to give kids, you have to talk about the bond market, the stock market. You've got to talk about international flows of capitalism. You have to get into the details, and you can't do this without talking about Marx's Capital. The sense of what's happening to us really requires or involves a larger sense of, we need to talk about a larger sense of justice, because the system is and isn't working. It's not working in terms of the way we think it's working, i.e. Keynesianism. It's talking in terms of a deeper capitalist logic that Marx fleshed out, but but mostly in terms of production. He anticipated problems with reproduction, and of course the complications of finance, which we have to today. This is where we must talk about justice. This is where an intense exploitation is happening. So, in other words, I find myself to talk about the way things are, which is really messed up and calls for demands of justice. And I talk about the way that things are to be and how do you put them together. Acts, we are still grappling with, we're still to a certain degree talking within the monetary framework. When we talk about how things, what needs to be done, we talk about in terms of the word free. And I think Axel is right. We have to. So what we want is free healthcare, free education, housing, not, to the extent that these things must be provided. But we can only do so in terms of this word free, by which we mean money. In other words, we're still caught up in talking about things in terms of, well, who's going to pay for it? Who isn't going to pay for it? I have to give lectures on money and how money works, and at the same time to talk about how money doesn't work when you're talking about institutions based on care and love and service. So it's sort of this bifurcated realm. Now you can say things like, to put these together, optimism of the will, pessimism of the intellect. Back to Fromm, though. So I'm gonna pull age rank here. And there seems to be two sorts, because I remember when people were reading Fromm, back in the 60s. When I was in high school, my high school teacher handed me a copy of Fromm and his on love. In other words, people were reading Fromm. Now, mostly when we talk about new form or resistance, we're talking about counter. So I talk about counterculture, counter hegemony. And we see these things in Minneapolis. We see these things all over the world. We see counter resistance. But this sort of resistance is still based on that against which we are countering, right? So we see Minneapolis arising from a particular problem that has its generation in white male alienation, but it's counter. It's not its own spontaneous sense of a new way of thinking about what it means to be human. That's what Fromm did. Fromm said, Fromm looked at what was happening in the 60s in working class children and the hippie movement, and he said, this is new. And this is, you could say what happened at Woodstock, what happened in music is counter, but that's wouldn't be capturing the whole of it. The 60s involved a serious crisis, which we are in today. Fromm was one of those people who said we can do something different, which is more than just counter. And he focused on eros. He focused on old Greek ways, perhaps, but in a new way, so that people were engaged in us. It was just astonishing how quickly the world changed through indeed through thought alone. Music, so many things changed like that, and all of a sudden it was all over. Um, 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 Another way to put it, people read Fromm, and they said, and indeed they read Fromm on love. And they said, we can do this other ways. There are more human ways to do this. So I will end with this again note of optimism and relate it directly to Fromm. Fromm was the guy, as well as Marcuse, who said, think deeply about humanitarianism, not humanity. Indeed, we were, the classic paper in 1968, in the early 70s was Utopia. Nobody talks about utopia anymore. We were encouraged to do so. But all of this was shut down and almost hardly ever. No, but when people talk about utopia, they read 1984. Or they read Huxley stuff. So that's where I would like to conclude. But one thing that we did talk about as well, and one thing that Hegel, to conclude, is that Hegel says that freedom is not in the state. The state is a dangerous place. Politics is dangerous. What we really should find freedom in is in artistry. It's in living through art in an artistic way. This is how we find our humanity. Indeed, as psychologists today relate this to the idea of play, playing with ideas, playing with the world. I have said before, I will say it again. The man who was most truly free is Colonel Korn, artist that he is, and
Yay!
I would also like to ask him to give some concluding remarks as to
Yay, coin.
how we have achieved his goal and the ongoing goal. Has this spoken to your interests, concerns, ideas, and indeed utopian vision of the way that we can live? So I leave these words to you, Mr. Korn, Herr Korn, Colonel
Oh
Korn. What do you think
my,
about what we've been doing?
not much. My brain is mush. It's real. It's like an apple pie, but it's mushy. It's really a bad apple pie. It didn't really go up. It's just this mush, but it tastes really good. I'm just sitting here dining away on this, and I really love to hear people say what I think. So thank you all. I will just leave it with that then. And I don't know, we completely went over the time again. Plan was different, but maybe Sally, you might have to jump, but a few of us might still stay around. So if some of you want to call in, I will post this video on the Patreon side, and in the comments I will post an invitation so you can join our call. And with that, I will say Red Fleet out.
Okay.
Bye-bye.